In the late 16th century, an English company ran its own prison inside the Ottoman Empire. Not a colony, not conquered land, another empire's capital. The guards were English, the law was English, and the Sultan allowed it. That arrangement began with a single piece of paper signed in London in 1581. To understand how that became possible, we have to start somewhere much less dramatic. It begins with a charter that looks, at first, almost routine. A queen signs. A cluster of London merchants receives the right to trade with the Ottoman Empire. Exclusive right. No other Englishman is allowed in. It sounds like a reward for enterprising traders. A way to funnel distant profits back into a struggling royal treasury. But a few lines in that charter feel out of place. They mention consuls, jurisdiction, authority over English subjects abroad. However, why would a monarch embed legal language like that into what should be a simple trade monopoly? The moment we're in might explain part of it. England in the 1580s is poor, insecure, and surrounded by rivals. Spain dominates the seas that matter, especially the Mediterranean. To sail openly toward Ottoman ports is to invite Spanish fire. So, one possibility is that the crown is trying to get around this problem by using merchants as a shield. If Spanish guns open up on a London trader, the Queen can feign distance. These are private men, not royal envoys. That reading works, until we see what those private men actually managed to achieve in Constantinople. The newly chartered Levant Company sends William Harborne east. He isn't a noble or a military commander, he is a merchant with letters. He arrives at the Ottoman court with an offer we can only partly reconstruct. He leaves with the capitulations. At first glance, they look like commercial privileges. Lower customs, safe conduct, the right to reside, the usual perks foreign merchants seek. If we dig a little deeper, something strange will appear. English subjects in Ottoman lands are to live under English law, judged by English representatives. For a long time, I thought of that as a simple consular safeguard. Merchants want familiar courts, the Sultan wants their trade, everyone compromises. But the scale of these rights, and their formal recognition, suggest more than private arbitration. They imply islands of English jurisdiction, written into the fabric of another empire. Well, why would the Ottomans accept that, especially from a relatively minor power like England? To answer that, we can follow the cargo. The main English export eastward through the company is broadcloth, heavy, coarse wool. Not precious metal, not cutting-edge weapons, just cloth. It feels oddly prosaic for such grand legal concessions. Perhaps at first it served a simple market, everyday fabric for ordinary people in bustling Ottoman cities. That's the intuitive explanation. A huge empire always needs cheap cloth, but the volume is far beyond what street markets alone could absorb. Shipment after shipment of the same product, this begins to look less like fashion and more like supply. When we shift our gaze from the market stalls to the barracks, something clicks. The Ottoman state maintains a vast standing army. Soldiers require uniforms. Uniforms require durable cloth in staggering quantities. Suddenly, English broadcloth stops looking random. The Levant Company may not just be providing a consumer good. It is likely feeding a military machine, supplying standard cloth for imperial troops. And England, a Protestant rival of Catholic Spain, becomes a quiet logistical partner of the Ottoman state. If that's even partly true, the capitulations take on a different tone. The Ottomans may have been granting extraterritorial rights in exchange for something more valuable than mere trade. They were securing a reliable supply of material support from a kingdom that shared an enemy. At roughly the same time, English ships begin to appear in Mediterranean waters, fast, well-armed, and Protestant. They harass Spanish interests, and they occasionally cooperate with Ottoman fleets without formal alliances. It's not hard to imagine an unspoken arrangement forming, you clothe our soldiers and trouble our foe, we let your laws travel farther than your borders. Meanwhile, the Levant Company starts to build what it calls factories across Ottoman land. The word suggests smoke and noise, but these are not industrial plants. They're fortified compounds enclosed by walls controlled by English consuls. Within these walls, English rules apply. There are chapels, counting houses, and court chambers. Disputes between Englishmen are settled not by local judges, but by company officers. It's easy at this point to say they just wanted safety in a foreign city, and yet there is a detail that gently breaks that comforting frame. The company constructs its own prison. The first English prison in the eastern Mediterranean doesn't belong to the monarch or to any church. It belongs to a trading company. Its cells are meant for wayward English subjects under its jurisdiction. When merchants own a prison, the line between commercial and governmental power starts to blur. The fact that the company can arrest, try, and confine its people abroad suggests a depth of delegated authority we don't normally associate with trade. At the top of this peculiar structure stands an English ambassador to the Ottoman court. For much of the company's history, he is chosen and paid not by the state, but by the company itself. Here again, a dual identity emerges. When he negotiates, is he speaking for England or for a board of directors? When interests diverge, which side does he favor? For a while, the arrangement works. Wool goes east, silver, goods, and influence come west. The English treasury benefits from customs duties on this trade. The company's monopoly keeps competitors out. The Ottoman state gets cloth and maritime disruption aimed at its powerful rival. Then the human element begins to complicate things. Company factors its agents abroad do not live in these factories for a season. Many stay for decades. They learn Turkish or Arabic. They cultivate relationships with local officials. Some marry into local families. Over time, their lives become entangled with the societies around them. The board in London begins to worry. Letters complain of factors becoming too familiar with local ways, too indulgent in Ottoman customs. At first, this might sound like cultural snobbery. Then you notice how it links to concerns about obedience. Once your own officers are emotionally and practically invested in another world, how tightly can you control them from thousands of miles away? Those walled compounds were supposed to be islands of Englishness, but the people inside them are slowly changing. Around the same time, the company's economic base starts to feel less secure. Ottoman elites develop a taste for lighter fabrics and finer weaves. Competition increases. The once reliable demand for English broadcloth becomes patchier. Initially, the company seems to treat this as temporary turbulence. Trade has always had its ups and downs. But when revenues don't bounce back, their instinct is not to reinvent their business. It is to tighten discipline. They raise fees on their own members, they restrict the freedom of factors to make side deals, and they try to squeeze stability out of rigidity. Inside those factories, the pressure must have been immense. Agents caught between the preferences of their local networks and the demands of distant shareholders, a hybrid life becoming increasingly untenable. Meanwhile, the geography that supported the whole system is shifting. Improved ship design and navigational knowledge make direct routes around Africa to India and beyond more viable. Dutch and English ships can reach eastern markets without threading through the Ottoman world. The empire that once sat astride the only practical overland gateways to Asia now faces workarounds. If the Levant is no longer the necessary bridge, what does that do to a company founded on controlling that crossing? At the same time, another chartered body, the East India Company, is rising. It adopts familiar elements, monopoly rights, extraterritorial privileges, private enforcement, but it applies them with a different ambition. It moves from trade to territorial rule, from compounds to provinces. Against that backdrop, the Levant Company looks less like the cutting edge and more like an early experiment. Eventually, the English state makes a quiet but telling adjustment. It appoints its own official ambassador to the Ottoman court, separate from the company's representative. Diplomacy moves back into formal hands. The corporate voice is no longer the only English voice in Constantinople. Not long after, the company's monopoly is withdrawn. Trade in the region continues, but without the old exclusive charter. The company, having lost the special status that made it unique, dwindles and is dissolved. Its walls and prisons fade. Its factors disappear into the sea of other merchants and officials. Yet one part of its legacy proves stubborn. The capitulations, those arrangements that allowed foreign subjects to live under their own laws inside the Ottoman Empire, remain. Other European powers secure similar terms. Over time, Ottoman cities accumulate pockets of foreign jurisdiction, consulates, communities, and courts operating to their own rules. A legal archipelago grows inside a supposedly unified empire. What began as a specific deal with one English company gradually helps normalize a wider pattern. Foreign powers insisting that their citizens remain outside local legal reach. In moments of crisis, those exceptions will become levers, giving outside states excuses to intervene. The Levant Company didn't plan that. It was solving immediate problems. Profit for merchants, revenue for a queen, supply for a sultan, but the framework it inhabited and stretched left marks. Looking back, it's tempting to say that this is where corporations first start to look like small, mobile states, owning prisons, writing rules, negotiating as almost equal partners with empires. Inside its own century, though, it likely felt improvised. A monarchy low on cash, merchants high on risk appetite, an empire needing cloth and ships, each taking the step that made sense at the time. The deeper pattern only appears when we stand far away from that initial charter and trace the lines outward. Lines that run from a wool contract to extraterritorial courts, from a factory prison to questions about who really governs whom. Today, when companies sign contracts with governments, move capital at speeds no state can match, and sometimes behave as if borders are suggestions rather than limits, the ghost of that early experiment is faintly visible. A queen's ink on a piece of parchment, a few merchants at court, a distant sultan facing a powerful enemy. Somewhere between those three, the shape of power tilted slightly. Just enough that, centuries later, we can still feel the angle. On paper, it was just a charter, a company, a contract for cloth. In practice, it was something stranger, a balance sheet where sovereignty, profit, and war all appeared on the same line. A reminder that the story of power is often written not in battles or coronations, but in ledgers, clauses, and quietly signed agreements. This has been the Historical Audit. If you want to keep tracing how small signatures reshaped empires, and how old contracts still echo in the way power works today, you know what to do. Subscribe, leave your own findings in the comments, and join us next time as we open another file and audit another piece of history.